Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/historyfangirl. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Kindle, Android, or MP3 player. Hi, I'm Stephanie Craig. Welcome to the History Fangirl podcast. This is episode 51, Traveling the Green Book. In the first half of the 20th century, the automobile became a symbol of freedom for American families. Suddenly, the world was more open. Folks were no longer confined to train timetables or bus schedules. For middle-class families able to afford their own automobile, the world was now different, and the Great American Road Trip was born. For Black Americans, these freedoms and possibilities collided with old hatreds, prejudices, and dangers. The road trip's appeal called to everyone equally, but not everyone was treated equally out on the road. To navigate these dangers, Black Americans used the Green Book, which was a travel guide that helped them find safe lodging, gas stations that would serve them, and places where they could eat along their journey. In September of last year, I went on a tour of Alabama's Civil Rights Trail with the Alabama Tourism Board. On that trip, I met Tamiko Harvey, the travel blogger behind the website Passports and Grub. And it was also on that trip that we both came face to face with one of these green books. And I talk about it in the episode, but it's just not something that I had really consciously thought about before. After our trip, she ended up using the Green Book to plan a trip with her daughter. And so we're going to chat about the history of the Green Book, what travel was like for Black Americans under Jim Crow and in today, and then also Tamiko's experiences actually traveling the Green Book on a family road trip. My guest today is Tamiko Harvey. She is the owner and creator of PassportsandGrub.com, and we actually met last September traveling around the South together, and so I'm really excited to have you come on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So today we're going to talk about a chapter of American history that I feel like, even though I love travel history, that I was really undereducated about, and that is the Green Book, which is officially the official title is the Negro Motorist Green Book. It was called the Green Book, and it was a travel guide designed to help African Americans navigate, both Jim Crow South and just a greater racist America in the early age of road tripping. So we're going to talk about the history of the Green Book, but how did you first get interested in it?
Actually, I had been interested in it before our trip. And when we took the national, what was it called? For Birmingham, it was the Civil Rights Trail that we sort of did together, which is how we actually met. And when we went to the museum, the Green Book was housed in a case there. And once I saw that book, I said, maybe this makes sense for me to use this as a part of my travels when I'm traveling and I'm going through different states in the South. If I look through the book and see if some of these places are still open, are they still there? Are there historic markers where these locations exist? And so from there, I purchased the book. I actually purchased it right off of Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I purchased it right off of Amazon. And from there, I started trying to map out some of these locations that I wanted to look at, because I feel as though, we are supposed to be in a post-racial era, but it feels like we have taken about 10 steps backwards.
Yes. And for anyone who's interested in the Civil Rights Trail in Alabama, I interviewed the educational director of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, which was another episode. So I'll link in the show notes to that episode. He was amazing. And that trip was life-changing. I think, one, it's hard to walk across the Selma Bridge or see where Martin Luther King's house was bombed without it profoundly affecting you, but also just tying all of it together. It made me see kind of overwhelmingly, not what it would have been like. I don't think that's something I can really understand, but just that everything was much bigger than I think of it as. What was it
Right.
like for you traveling on the Civil Rights Trail in Alabama? 'Cause as a woman of the South, too.
Right. And, it was my heart sort of, I think the one place that stood out to me the most was when we were at the cemetery at the Daughters of the Confederacy Cemetery.
Yes.
And it
I
was
talked about that a
beautiful.
little bit with David Platts when we were talking about the Civil War. So this is the cemetery where the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, the founder, is buried. Ugh.
Yes. And I when we came in and I saw the trees, and there are these big, beautiful trees. I mean, the cemetery is just, it was beautiful to me. I mean, it seemed so unreal that all of this hate could be buried in one place, with the cemetery being so beautiful. And for me as a Black woman and a Black woman of the South, to stand in a cemetery where clearly, I'm not welcome, I'm not wanted, and they view me as someone that is less than. That was sort of mind blowing to me, that, my grandmother and my great grandmother sort of experienced the things that they experienced being in the South, and then me in 2017 standing in a cemetery of that magnitude.
So for listeners who, just to picture it, if you've ever seen like Beyonce's Lemonade, the like beautiful Spanish moss hanging down, but instead of it being, like a domestic setting, you're seeing graves of people that literally founded some of the most hateful not chapters, but founded the most hateful organization in American history. And the thing that messed me up was seeing people that were buried there like 2 years ago.
Yes, yes. I have a picture of one of the grave plaques, the tombstones, and it was just 2 years ago. And so I was like, that is like, mind blowing that we are still fighting this fight, if you per se.
So I think that's a great segue to talk about the Motorist book, because one of the things that I talked about on the 16th Street Baptist Church episode was, how some of the stories that you hear about in the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute are things that could happen tomorrow in the news and it wouldn't even shock you. And I think that with the risks that Black drivers undertake in today's society, it's hard to imagine how much worse it was at the advent of cars, and how brave somebody was even for undertaking a road trip. But then also there were times when somebody needed to, not every road trip is for pleasure. Sometimes you have to go drive to see your mother, and just the perils of being a Black traveler in the early 20th century. So what was the state, I guess, of Black travel kind of in the 1920s, 1930s, when people are starting to take road trips in America?
Yeah, it's interesting. That was sort of the time when I think the first Howard Johnson, where they're called motels now, where they had the exterior rooms. And so it's not hotels what we think of today. It was completely different. And so when, Black people, which is the term that I use, had to travel back during that time, they had to be very careful. They had to make sure they looked a certain way, that they dressed a certain way. All of that was really planned and thought about, because taking a wrong turn could literally be deadly. So they had to have maps, and they had to know exactly what time of the day, where they needed to travel to, how they need to get there. They need to stay on task. And, we take for granted stopping at a rest stop and taking pictures and looking out and saying, oh, I'm going to rest my feet, and I'm going to sit here for maybe about 30 or 40 minutes and get me something to eat. And so it was a very methodical and planned process that we don't even think about now. I just got back from Gatlinburg, Tennessee yesterday. And, it never entered my mind, where am I going to stop to get gas? Where am I going to stop to get food? If my daughter needs to go to the bathroom, where am I going to stop, and making sure that, you have cups and things that you have in the car with you to relieve yourself, because what if there isn't a place that you can stop? So all of those things were methodical and were thought out when Black motorists were traveling, things that we take for granted.
So who were the types of Black Americans that were taking road trips during this time?
It was probably going to be a lot of the civil rights activists. Because they were traveling from state to state trying to get voter registration up. You also had a lot of business travelers as well that were traveling. A lot of the everyday African American people, a lot of people didn't even have cars. So most of the people that were traveling, they were traveling on business. There was some leisure travel, but not a whole lot of leisure travel, because during that time frame, most of the Black people could not afford gas. They didn't have cars. So those were sort of luxury items that, everybody wasn't privy to. So most of the travelers were going to be travelers or travelers that was working during the civil rights era.
Yeah, because while actually being on the road had a lot of complications, public transportation was segregated. And so even though there were a lot of drawbacks, for those that could afford to buy a car, there were still benefits of not having to be in the third class smoking car that's stuffed and gross, or not have to worry about every single it still minimized your interactions. And
Correct.
Public transportation was dangerous. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you're talking about multiple alternatives, but every one of them has danger. And it's just, what is the type of danger? Which is just, it's crazy to think about. There's so many things I take for granted in travel, and I never even think about some of the issues that came up when I was researching this show, which is it just makes me very grateful every day, and just so impressed that people were able to navigate around it.
So especially in South with states such as Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, the book was really, really needed. It also extended to parts of Connecticut and California, but it was mostly for the South, and to make sure that everybody was covered. We would like to think that the South was the only pocket where, Black people or African Americans had to worry about what they were doing or where they were going or where they were stopping to. But it wasn't just the South. It was, some of the northern states were just as cruel as the southern states. The southern states just seemed to get more of a bad rap for it, if you must say.
It seems so. I did an episode about Black pioneers, and what I gathered from that episode and from visiting Alabama on the trip that we took was, and also just the 2016 election, was that if you don't have the laws in place, but the people feel the same way, everything's just going to be driven underground. But reality for Black people at the time was not better. Maybe it was moderately better. It seems like it was economically better. It seemed like there were more economic opportunities in northern cities, but it's not because the white people there were better.
If I'm not mistaken, it was originally in New York, was where the first guide came out.
I think so. I know that when they opened a headquarters, they opened it in Harlem, which made sense. If you think about Harlem at that time too, as a great place for Black business owners. But right. I don't know what the exact first edition was, but let's back up and talk a little bit about, so we kind of have gone over like how terrifying and what kind of information people would need to be able to take a road trip safely. How did the actual book come about?
So the book was originally came to light or published, in 1936. And it provided a rundown of hotels, guest houses, service stations, drugstores, barbershops, restaurants that were going to be safe for African American travelers during Jim Crow. And the book came about because the person who actually published the book was having a hard time navigating, and it sort of became like a yellow pages for Black travelers. And Victor Green was the author of the book.
Which I didn't realize. I thought it was just called the Green Book, but that it has, because it is physically green, and that it had some other official name, which the official name is longer than just the Green Book. But yeah, I didn't realize he named it after himself. I think that was really cool.
Yes, I know. For him to have named it's like lifelong that this book is going to be forever tied. I would love to know where his family is now and what do they think about, him publishing this book and that it's still being used and talked about in history classes across the world. That's amazing.
I would love to know too. And also I didn't learn about this in school. Right? I think I'd heard of it maybe like in pop culture, and then it snapped in my head when I saw it that that's what it was, but I don't know if I really had thought about it much beforehand. Right. However, once you kind of process what it is, it sheds light on a whole different chapter of what it was like to be living at that time. And I feel like every time I have to like peel back a layer of what America was really like in some distant past, like I weirdly get a little patriotic that we're capable of getting better, even if we're not where we should be and are very far from where we should be, that we at least are trying. And some people are trying, but then also just makes the bottom fall out like of your heart of like, wow, like would I even have been able to survive if I'd been born into those circumstances at the time? It's so daunting to think about.
It is. And, there's a t-shirt that a lot of Black people are wearing now, which I don't know, I find to be a disservice. And it says, "We are not our ancestors." Have you seen those?
I haven't, no, but I also live in Europe, so I'm not as like, if it's not on Instagram, I'm not usually seeing it.
Yeah, with everything that's going on with travel and with the race relations, there are a lot of Black people that are wearing shirts that are saying we are not our ancestors. And for me to think about being in this era where you had to have a Green Book, where you were discriminated against, where you had to know exactly everything that you were doing. It's easy for us to sit here in 2018 and say what I would not put up with and what you would do when they sort of paved the way, even with this Green Book. It paved the way to make sure that, we could travel safely and that I have all of the luxuries that I have afforded to me now. So for me to say I am not my ancestor, as if that is a negative connotation, that is a little disheartening to me, especially with everything that, our ancestors fought to get us where we are here. But that's a little bit off subject. So let's veer back.
I will veer back, but I like that because I think one of the things about like this show, like what I like about travel is that like you're constantly going somewhere that's like maybe like a picture book story in your head and you don't know the full story. Like even a place like Windsor Castle, like it's still a castle. Like, and then you peel back the layers and you're like, these are real people making real decisions in circumstances I might not have been smart enough or sharp enough or lucky enough to survive. And it like, and a little bit of like, it makes me really grateful, but also a little bit humbled every time. And so like, I was humbled traveling around Alabama at the greatness of everyday people and wondering whether or not I would have had courage like that. So I get
correct.
I get what you mean. So, and also it's easy to think of things that happened in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s as history. And for you and me, those things are history because we were born after this. But I want to read a quote from John Lewis because He's Congressman John Lewis. When we were in Atlanta, we were in the neighborhood that he represents in Congress. And when we were at Selma, we were at a place where he was beaten, fighting for the Voting Rights Act. And he is he's still one of the most important civil rights leaders in the country today. And this was his experience traveling in the 50s. So he said, there was no restaurant for us to stop at until we were well out of the South. So we took our restaurant right in the car with us. Stopping for gas and to use the bathroom took careful planning. Uncle Otis has made this trip before, and he knew which place along the way offered colored bathrooms and which were just better to pass on by. Our map was marked and our route was planned that way by the distances between service stations where it would be safe for us to stop. So one of America's civil rights leaders today is still informed by his experiences having to deal with this issue. So it's not like it's as far in the past as we wish it was.
Right. And that's the sad thing too, that it's not as far as we think it is in our minds.
How did people get the Green Book? It seems like it would not have been something that would just be for sale, easy to get, but I don't know.
It actually was. It was in all of the Black restaurants. It was in the wherever it was, that the hotels, restaurants, it was sold throughout everywhere. And so it actually was pretty easy to get your hand on one of the Green Books. It wasn't that difficult. And so it was sold everywhere as a travel guide or a vacation guide, and it was actually marketed with the tagline "Vacation and Recreation Without Humiliation." And so it was for purchase everywhere. And I think about 15,000 copies per year was sold to Black business travelers and vacationers.
That's amazing, because just to know that, because I'm sure you didn't have to get a new copy every year. So just to know that probably hundreds of thousands of people, especially when you consider that you'd have one maybe for a whole family, were helped to stay safe with the help of this book. That's a really great thing to think about. So how did it fall into disuse? Why did it disappear?
I think that around about 19, maybe, I'm going to say about the last edition came out in 1963, 64. And that is sort of when the voting rights and all of, with Martin Luther King, that was the last issue that came out. And I think for a lot of people, we were beginning to believe as though we weren't maybe post-racial, but we were heading in that direction, especially with the last edition coming out in 1964. And so I believe that people sort of, and he passed away in 1960. And so maybe if he had stayed alive, that the book would have continued to maybe go on maybe another couple of years. But I think in conjunction with his passing away in 1860, and with sort of the turn of all of the rights that were sort of being afforded to Black people, whether or not they were actually being enforced or not, it's something completely different. So I think those two things sort of probably helped with the book not becoming as popular as it had been in the past.
So when you decided that you wanted to travel the book, what did that process look like, and kind of how did your family react? Was this a trip you took by yourself, or did your family go with you?
Yeah, we actually, when my daughter was going to Florida, she was competing in a cheer competition in Orlando. And of course, we live in Tennessee, which is where my home base is. It's in Murfreesboro, right outside of Nashville. And so I decided, we had to go through Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, in which Orlando, of course, is in Florida. We have to go through, all of those states. So why not take the book with me and sort of map out? We weren't in any rush. We didn't have a particular time to be in Orlando, and it was a road trip. So why not stop at some of these places, see if they are still available, see if some of these gas stations are still there, see if some of these homes are still there. And so that was the premise behind the Green Book and our sort of tribute to seeing what it was like in just all of these back roads that, we take for granted now, how far off the road, these motorists had to travel to even get somewhere because they couldn't be on the main road, and it was taking them an hour or 2 hours out of their travels in order to get to a destination just so they could travel safely.
Oh, wow. I don't know why I didn't think about that. But like, that completely makes sense, that the information would be how to get them there safely, but it's not like a Google Maps, which is like, this is the quickest one. It's like you have to really find these places in a world without easy to navigate digital maps.
Correct. So like we have a navigation system now that tells you to turn right, turn left, go up 2 stop signs, 30 feet, make whatever. And if you think in the 1930s and 40s that motorists, African-American not just African-American, but motorists, period, didn't have the kind of technology that we have now. So, they had to really sort of figure out where they were going. And sometimes it would take them way off of their route because they still wanted to arrive where they were going to arrive safely. So it wasn't just, I'm going to drive to Atlanta from Tennessee, but me driving to Atlanta to Tennessee, I have to drive 60 miles out of the way in order to spend the night or to get some gas. Yeah. Because everything on the road, is not for me, or I'm not welcome.
And I would imagine that part of the reason, and I'm speculating here, but part of the reason some of the businesses way off the main road would open themselves up to Black travel would be because that would be a way for them to get customers because they weren't in the most desirable location in the first place.
Correct.
So what was some of the places, like, what were some of your favorite places that you went to that you found in the book that you wouldn't have gone to without the book?
Actually, I'm going to be honest. I would probably say every place in there were homes. There were a lot of homes. Some of the homes still were up. There were a few that sort of put me in the mind of, they weren't slave quarters, but they were that's what it looked like to me now. And it possibly could have been that in the past. And someone was still, was living there afterwards. There was one particular one. It was a little small shack, a wooden shack. And it was someone's home at the time. But to me, it looked like it had previously been maybe like a slave quarter. There were gas stations. A lot of them were no longer in service. There were empty lots where gas stations used to be. And it was taking us, off of the path of where we had to go. I think we stopped at about 4 locations, and it added maybe like an extra almost 3 hours to our road trip because it was like 30, 40 minutes off of the road to get to these locations.
I just think if that was your only option and you were traveling in a world that was less safe, like that's got to, just like mentally, what was your reaction to doing it?
And for me, we were driving during the daytime. So, and when you think about that, most of these drivers were driving at night so that they wouldn't be seen. Because if the police saw them during the daytime or other white motorists saw them during the daytime, they were more likely to get harassed. And so if you can imagine being on a dark road at night, no lights, because, there weren't all the street lights like we have now, and you're trying to literally find your way and you only can see, the 10 or 20 feet ahead of you. I can't imagine how frightening that is.
That's crazy. So I did read that, I don't know if it was in the Green Book or if it was another, because there were a few other similar publications that popped up. But one of the things that I read said that Black men were advised to bring a chauffeur's hat with them and wear it so that if anybody gave them trouble, they would think that it was a car owned by a white person that they worked for. Can you imagine being successful enough that you can buy a car before anyone else in your city is buying a car, and you still have to pretend that it doesn't belong to you so that you don't get harassed, and you still have to drive to a shack to stay in the middle of the night?
But even now, my husband, we live in and this is current as we speak. We live in a very affluent, all-white neighborhood. We are the only Black family in my neighborhood. We live in the most conservative town in the United States of America. And my husband would put a car seat in his back seat and dolls and toys in the back window of his car now, so that when we're driving or he's driving home from work in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and he is pulled over by a police officer, he doesn't appear to be a threat because there is a car seat in the back seat and there are toys in the window, which hint says, I am a family man.
I've heard anecdotally people doing that. I don't think I've ever heard somebody I know tell me about that situation. And so I think every time you hear somebody that tells you a story from their life, it hits harder than abstract information. But thank you for sharing that with us, because I don't know if I know for sure that most people just don't get it. But even if you think you get it, you don't get it if it's not your life.
And especially for where we live. We live in a very neighborhood that, they have made it clear that my neighbors have made it clear that they would prefer for us not to be here. And this is 2018.
Yeah. So when that happens, or I guess what would your advice be if somebody else finds themselves in that situation?
In a situation where what? Elaborate on that a little bit more. If they find themselves in.
Yeah. So so I was sharing with you a little bit about my living situation right now. So my fiance is African and we are moving, and because our apartment is being, so at first we were told we didn't have to move. Then we were told we do have to move. Then we were told we didn't, whatever. So now we have to move, and Bulgaria is not a great place for Black people to try to find apartments to rent. There are not laws that protect them. So multiple times he would just get turned away from apartments from people that did not want to rent to him, which is, and I can't go and I can't go and pretend that we are people that we aren't. If I show up by myself and then he shows up on moving day, he has to be safe when I'm not here, right? Especially because I'm not here a lot. So that is just something that I am afraid of. How brave do you have to be if you're going to move in, once we move tomorrow?
Right.
And I just think it's one of those things that I've just been lucky not to have to deal with that. But that was not because I earned any right to not deal with it. So what is your advice for someone who shows up in a building or a neighborhood and people don't want them to be there based on who they are?
It is very hard because I've had to have discussions with my daughter, who is 11 years old, about race. And because the neighbors, some of the neighbors, not all of them, don't want their daughters playing with my daughter. And so I've had to have those conversations with my daughter about race and race relations, and stop knocking on their doors, stop going down there. They don't want you. They don't want their daughter playing with you. And the only thing that I can say is that, we are, unfortunately for them, we're not selling our house. We're not moving anywhere anytime soon. And so, we mind our own business, and it's sad, we don't participate in any of the activities that go on in the neighborhood, because they have made it, abundantly clear that they don't want us in the neighborhood. So when they have, neighborhood yard sales and, Christmas parties and Halloween and all that kind of stuff, we don't participate.
So I was trying to think of all of the things that they're losing out on, because you're one of, if not the major travel blogger from Tennessee, and your job, you are a promoter, you promote destinations, and
right.
So that's just a lot. So,
but what we have to, and I think it comes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go.
I think it comes to that, once people get to know people and we realize that we are literally all the same. I remember the neighbor, one of the neighbors that I'm speaking with, his daughter came over here one day, and she came in for a brief moment, and he came in, he knocked on the door and said, "Is my daughter down here? I thought I saw her walking down this way." And I said, "Yes, she is." And I said, "You're more than welcome to come in." And he came in and he looked around and he was like, "Oh my gosh, your house is so nice." And in my mind, I wanted to say, "Well, what did you think it was going to be?"
Yeah.
And he came in and he looked around and he was like, "Oh my God, it's so clean." And I wanted to say, "What? We use the same maid service that you use. Yes, it's clean." But I was like, I just said thank you, and he said, "Oh, our floor plan is the same as your floor plan." When you have those kind of interactions where they see that you are a person that you interact with them on a human to human basis, that will sort of bring their fear level down a little bit more, because that's what it is. It's fear.
So how do you think growing up in the South and then living in this incredibly conservative community, which I grew up in Edmond, Oklahoma, it's conservative. It's not that conservative, but Oklahoma also isn't. Oklahoma isn't because Oklahoma wasn't in the South. It was a Native American reservation during the Civil War. It doesn't have, it's not it doesn't have as good of a mixed population. And so Oklahoma has a lot of racism issues, but they're slightly different because they're Native Americans and Hispanics are, that's where our race issues come in more into play. But how do you think growing up in the South and living in this incredibly conservative community has affected how you travel and how you want other people to travel and experience the world?
Ironically, it doesn't affect how I travel. I don't let what's going on in the media, I don't let other people's fear dictate where I go, what I do. And I have chosen not to allow that to affect me. I don't feed off of other people's fears. So wherever I want to go, if there's, regardless of what it is, because you can go out tomorrow and get hit by a car. So when people say, "Oh, this place is dangerous," or, even for TBEX last year was held in Huntsville, Alabama, which is a travel conference. It was in Huntsville, Alabama last year. And a lot of people were very upset because TBEX was held in Alabama because, Alabama is known to be racist, and a lot of the LGBT community were afraid that, they were going to get killed or whatever. And of course, every state has their own pocket of racism and things that are, not nice, not so nice. But at the end of the day, nobody is really going to come up to somebody and shoot you because you're Black, Well, the police do, yes, but everyday people, that's another subject. So, but I think that for the most part, I kind of just go about my day-to-day life. And I don't let that affect me. I really don't. I don't let it affect my travels. I don't let it stop me from traveling solo. I don't let it affect my daughter and me teaching her about travel and different destinations. I don't put that in her head that, well, we can't travel here because Black people aren't wanted. That's just not a part of my thought process.
So how did you end up deciding you wanted to write about, because you're an expert in culinary travel for the most part. Passports and Grubs obviously denotes that. How did you decide that you wanted to spend all of your life talking about food travel?
Growing up, my mother has never ventured outside of Tennessee. Her first time leaving Memphis, which is where I grew up, was when I moved to Nashville 4 years ago. My mother had never traveled outside of maybe a 10-mile radius of her home to church and to the grocery store, and that is about it. And that was me growing up as well. So if she didn't travel, of course, I didn't travel either. And so it became sort of an escape for me, reading books in high school and looking at all these places in the history books and thinking, oh my God, I want to go there. Oh my God, I want to do that. And talking to my mom, she just said, I never wanted to go anywhere. I never wanted to travel. And for me, it became, okay, I never did that growing up. I never went on vacation as a kid. We never literally went anywhere other than to church and to the grocery store. And so it sort of became an outlet and a release for me to say, I want to go. I want to experience different foods. I want to experience different cultures. I don't want to live in this bubble that I think that my way of doing things is the only way.
Since you are an expert on food travel, if somebody was going to come to Tennessee, what are like the 3 dishes that they absolutely need to try while they're there?
Okay, so my first place would be, of course, in Memphis, Tennessee, because Memphis is known for barbecue. And there is a little place, there's a little hole in the wall. It's called Cozy Corner. It's in the hood because that's where all of the best food is. And so it literally has some of the best barbecue you will ever taste. The meat really literally just falls completely off of the bone. That would be my number 1 spot. Will be in Memphis, and that's Cozy Corner Barbecue. My second place, it's well known, and it's in Nashville, and it is called the Loveless Cafe.
And what should somebody get when they're there?
So they are sort of like a diner. It's like an old school diner that has breakfast food, pancakes. It's literally like you are moving, like you have gone step back in time. I mean, it looks the exact same. So that is, and it just sort of has a nostalgic sort of feeling to it. The Loveless Cafe does. I mean, it's one for the history book. It looks the exact same. And then, of course, for Nashville again, is going to be known for their hot chicken. Have you ever heard of hot chicken before?
I feel like I've heard of it. I don't know, because I've been to Nashville a few times, but I don't know what it is.
So hot chicken is something that is known to Nashville. People come from all over the world to eat this hot chicken. It is like the spices, and I mean, it is really, really spicy. I mean, really, really spicy. The original hot chicken was Prince's Hot Chicken, but there's also a place called Hattie B's. To me, I like Prince's better, but Hattie B's is more well known than Prince's Hot Chicken. But Princess is the first hot chicken. And the story goes that his wife or girlfriend, I'm not sure which one, found out he was cheating on her, and she prepared some really, really spicy chicken to get back at him, and put all kind of hot sauce and spices and all that on there. And she gave it to him, and beholds to him, unbeknownst to her, it was really, really good. And so then he started preparing this hot chicken.
I love it.
So now everybody has their version of hot chicken in Nashville, even Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Oh, really? That's like a local dish that they have there. That's awesome. So if somebody was trying to decide whether or not they should buy a green book and go on a trip, and there are places all over, so almost anybody in America could theoretically drive a day and be at a place in the book, what would your tips be for them? And are you glad that you did it?
Yeah, I think that especially for children, I did it with my daughter so that she can have a better understanding of where we are now and how privileged her life is, and that it wasn't always this way. So that, and I think it's extremely educational for kids in a time where children are gimme, I want the best, I gotta have the latest, I gotta have the greatest, and they don't sort of understand how far they've come. And so I wanted to do it with my daughter so that she can have a better understanding of, where we are in today's society, and so that she can gain knowledge and understand her history. And this is where we are now. Yes, we're driving to Florida for you to go to a cheer competition, but this wasn't always the case. So take a day, look at a state, the state that you're in, and see, where was the closest place that you can go, and make a day trip out of it. Take a Saturday and say, hey, I want to go to these two places. I want to see if they still exist, and have history lessons with your children that can be both fun and educational.
So, yeah, and that's the thing that I think is important, is a lot of times my episodes revolve around like a single place, like one building or one city. But this is something that is all across America. Now, a lot of places in the West probably just didn't have as much, but because there wasn't a lot of business out there. But pretty much anybody who's in America can get a book and figure out the closest place to them. And it's probably not that far. And then the Green Book also even covered places in Mexico and Canada eventually, which I just love that in the Caribbean that they expanded that far out. All right, Tamika. So let me say that again. Tamiko, where can people find you?
They can find me at passportsandgrub.com. My Instagram is passportsandgrub.com as well. And Facebook is Passports and Grub as well. And last but not least, my Twitter is a little different. It's passports_grub.
My Twitter is different too. I hate Twitter.
Yeah, they would not allow me to have the same one. I don't know. I was kind of a little perturbed at them, but.
So people should definitely check out your website, and then we're going to put a link in the show notes to your write-up from the trip that we did together when we did the Civil Rights Trail. And then also, again, if you haven't listened to the episode about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, definitely check that episode out if you found this one interesting, because you and I visited there as part of the same trip. And so, that is just a really special place, and Birmingham is a really special place to learn about civil rights. All right, Tamiko. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and then also congratulations. I hear your talk at TBEX, the travel conference. Was it 2 weeks ago now?
Not quite 2 weeks. It's just been a little over a week since I've returned back from the Czech Republic, which was absolutely awesome. That has now became my number one place to visit, and I'm trying to figure out how I can get back next year. The Czech Republic was just literally amazing.
Well, I heard your talk at the conference was really, really, really good. So congratulations. And if you do go to the Czech Republic, you're going to have to come down to Bulgaria and visit me. Thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Have a great day.
I want to say thank you again to Tamiko for coming on the show. Check out her website, Passports and Grub, to help inspire your next food-centric adventure. She also has some amazing luxury hotel reviews, so if you're ever looking for a luxury hotel in the South, I would definitely check out her website. And then housekeeping. This episode comes out the week that I will be on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. If you want pictures or if you want to follow my adventures, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram under History Fangirl. While there, I'll be visiting Nesebar, which is one of Bulgaria's 10 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I am very excited. And if this is your first time listening to the show, head to historyfangirl.com for links to subscribe, or you can listen to shows right on my website. If you've already subscribed, take a moment to rate and review the show on iTunes or the podcast app of your choice, and I would be forever grateful. And thank you so much for listening.